You ever read a contract and think, whoever wrote this wasn't just protecting themselves, they were planning something, because I did. And today I'm sitting across from the very people who once erased me, watching them sign the dotted line of their own unraveling. We're on the 68th floor of a glass tower in Manhattan. The table is long, the suits are expensive, the air is recycled and heavy with power. I smile, because none of them remember what they did to me 3 years ago. Not really. To them, I was just another associate, another name on a list they cleared out to protect the firm's reputation. But I remember. I remember the vote, the silence, the nods of agreement, the way Ethan glanced away when they blamed the leak on me, like it was easier not to meet the eyes of the woman he once said he loved. I remember walking out with my badge, a cardboard box, and a career that was never supposed to recover. They thought I'd disappear. Instead, I studied, planned, built, and now I've brought something to this table far more valuable than a legal defense or a settlement. I've brought a reckoning. They think they're acquiring a next-gen compliance, AI. They're not wrong. But what they don't know is that she already knows everything. She's been inside their systems for months, quietly cataloging, analyzing, building a profile not just of risk, but of truth. There's a reason the contract they're signing today is 34 pages long. There's a reason Clause 27B is buried in the middle, worded just vaguely enough to seem standard. But it's not. That clause is my weapon. It doesn't just authorize data access. It hands me the keys to the empire that betrayed me. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's written in legalese. So go ahead. Sign it. Smile for the cameras. Shake my hand. Because this time, the erasure is yours. 3 years ago, I walked into that same conference room, but I wasn't the one holding the power. Back then, I was just an associate at Maddox and Gray, a rising star in the compliance division, fresh out of Harvard Law, hungry, sharp, and maybe too trusting. It was supposed to be a routine meeting, just a quarterly review. But the moment I stepped in, the room felt colder than usual. Everyone was already seated. No greetings, no coffee, just silence. And the faint hum of an air conditioner that suddenly sounded like a warning. Across the table sat Ethan, partner, golden boy, and until a week prior, the man I thought I'd marry. He didn't meet my eyes. The managing partner slid a folder across the table. "There's been a breach," he said flatly. "A confidential M&A draft was leaked to a competitor, traced back to your workstation." My heart stopped. "That's impossible," I said, voice steady but cracking underneath. Ethan finally looked at me. Soft eyes, sad mouth. "Naomi, we ran every protocol. Your login, your keycard. We don't want to believe it, either." No one asked for my explanation. No one cared to hear about the late-night hours I spent alone in the office, or how Ethan had full access to my files. They'd already decided. I was out. Just like that. My parents didn't make it easier. That night, I drove straight to their estate in Connecticut, hands still shaking on the steering wheel. Over dinner, my father polished his scotch while Mother stirred her soup like it might explain everything. "Maybe it's best not to fight this," she said gently. "It'll blow over faster if you disappear quietly." Disappear? They cared more about the family name than about their daughter being falsely accused. I looked at the people I thought would protect me and realized I was entirely alone. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream or beg. Instead, I packed what I could fit in one suitcase. I left the key to the guest house on the kitchen counter, and I drove back to a city that had swallowed me once already, but not this time. If they wanted me gone, they should have buried me deeper, because I wasn't just leaving behind a job or a reputation. I was leaving behind the last version of me that asked for permission. The apartment smelled like old radiator heat and takeout from the last tenant. One window, two locks that barely clicked, and a mattress on the floor. That's where I started over. Queens was loud in a way Manhattan never was. Less polished, more honest. The kind of place where ambition isn't flaunted. It's hidden behind double shifts and side hustles. I blended right in. Gone were the tailored suits and downtown brunches. Now it was thrift coats and coffee from bodega corners. My name disappeared from LinkedIn. The legal world moved on, but I didn't. By day, I took freelance contracts no one else wanted. Small startups, tight budgets, shady founders who didn't care who you used to be, as long as you could keep them out of jail. By night, I read, studied, watched the cracks in the system from the other side. And somewhere between compliance audits and unpaid invoices, I started to notice something. It wasn't just corruption, it was inefficiency, arrogance, human error, written in fine print. Companies were bleeding risk, not because they wanted to, but because no one saw the patterns fast enough to stop them. And that's when the idea came. Not revenge, not yet, just possibility. What if there was a way to catch risk before it became scandal? What if the system didn't need gatekeepers, just code? I kept notes in a tattered red notebook. Algorithms, clause types, legal triggers, red flags. If anyone had found it, they'd think it was nonsense. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of something bigger than clearing my name. It was a blueprint for a system that wouldn't care about who you were, only what you did. One night, after a particularly grim Zoom call with a founder hiding assets offshore, I wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page. Clara doesn't forget. I didn't know what Clara would become. Not yet. But she was mine. Quiet. Patient. Watching. And unlike me, she would never be caught off guard again. It started in a co-working basement that smelled like burnt coffee and forgotten dreams. The walls were unfinished drywall. The Wi-Fi cut out if someone upstairs microwaved anything. But it was the first place in a long time where I felt like I wasn't pretending. I was consulting for a scrappy fintech startup. 4 founders, 0 filters, and a desperate need to pass a compliance audit they didn't understand. They were building fast, too fast, cutting corners, asking me to just sign off on the risk models. I refused. One night, after the last of them stumbled out for drinks, I stayed behind. I sat alone with a whiteboard, tracing out the same problem over and over. Why were we still doing this manually? So many legal decisions, millions of them, hinged on people squinting at spreadsheets or chasing down policy PDFs. It wasn't scalable, wasn't smart. I didn't need a team. I needed something tireless, something that didn't forget, something that couldn't be pressured or bribed or blink at the wrong moment. That's when she came to life, in the form of a question. What if I could build a machine that saw risk the way I did? That night, I messaged an old contact from law school, Kaylee, brilliant, paranoid, a former AI ethics researcher turned back-end engineer for hire. I sent her a DM with just 4 words. Want to break compliance? She replied in less than 60 seconds. We called her Clara, not an acronym, not a brand, just a name that felt human enough to matter and robotic enough to never forget. Clara started as a simple parser. She could scan contracts, flag inconsistencies, and spit out alerts. But as Kaylee and I kept feeding her case law, SEC reports, whistleblower complaints, she began to evolve. She started mapping connections we hadn't seen, patterns, predictors, and most importantly, cover ups. We were training her to detect not just what was written, but what was missing. Silence in documents became data. One night, as I watched her scan a 200-page asset acquisition, Clara paused on a single redacted clause and flagged it. Risk factor misaligned with known disclosure language. I blinked. She had caught something. I hadn't. That was the first time I felt it. That shiver down your spine when you realize you're not building a tool, you're raising something alive. And unlike the people who erased me, Clara didn't care who was in the room. She just told the truth. She didn't make headlines. Not yet. But Clara was working, quietly, invisibly, inside contracts worth millions. Startups, small funds, private equity groups with too much ambition and too little caution. They handed over their legal docs like candy, and we fed them to her. One contract at a time, Clara dissected the anatomy of risk like a surgeon. No bias, no emotion, no fatigue. And me, I became the messenger, the human face of the machine. Clients loved it at first. How fast she worked, how clean the reports looked. Efficient, they called it, game-changing. Until she started showing them things they didn't want to see. Buried fraud triggers, misclassified assets, patterns that suggested insider trading no one was supposed to notice. That's when the phone calls got colder. Some pulled out, quietly. Others threatened to sue unless we changed the output. We didn't. Clara was designed for truth, not comfort. And that made us dangerous. But in that danger was leverage. We didn't chase big clients, we baited them, showed them just enough of what Clara could see, and let fear do the rest. One hedge fund sent over a bloated contract stack and asked if we could make it look clean. We ran it anyway. Clara flagged 22 violations. 6 were borderline criminal. I sent them back in a 2-page memo labeled Non-Negotiable Adjustments. They paid the invoice in full the next morning. No questions asked. Behind the scenes, our reputation was spreading. In boardrooms, in Slack channels, on the encrypted corners of Telegram, where VC deals really got made. A whisper. There's this firm with a system that can see everything. We weren't just a tool anymore. We were a myth. And like all myths, we were starting to scare the right people. One night, Kaylee looked up from her laptop, screen light dancing in her eyes. You realize, she said, we're not just cleaning messes anymore. We're rewriting the rules. I didn't answer, because deep down, I knew she was right. I hadn't built Clara just to survive. I built her to level the field. The system that destroyed me was built on secrets, on who you knew and what you could hide. But with Clara, there would be nowhere left to hide. It happened at a legal tech conference of all places. The kind of event where everyone wore lanyards and pretended to be impressed by AI demos that couldn't even parse a non-disclosure clause correctly. We had a booth tucked in the back, modest branding, no flashy neon, just a black screen with Clara's interface and a single word, trustless. Most people walked past, until he didn't. I saw him across the expo floor before he saw me, talking to a group of investors, laughing in that effortless way that used to feel like home. Still wore the same Rolex. Still styled his hair like it hadn't changed since prep school. But the second he turned and caught my eyes across the crowd, he stopped mid-sentence. His smile dropped, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw it. Recognition. And beneath it, something else. Doubt. He walked over like we hadn't spoken in years. Which we hadn't. "Naomi," he said, voice rehearsed and cautious. "Damn. You look great." I smiled. "Better lighting on this side of the industry, I guess." He chuckled like we were old colleagues, like he hadn't once helped throw me to the wolves. "You here consulting?" he asked, glancing at the Clara demo screen. I shook my head. "Number I run this." His jaw ticked, just slightly. "Wait, this is yours?" "Co-founded. CEO." I let the words land like subtle punches. He recovered quickly, or at least pretended to. "I've actually heard of your system. Some of the partners are asking about it." Of course they were. Clara had been running silent audits on his firm for the last 2 months, through a proxy client in Singapore. I hadn't just studied the firm. I'd studied him, his access logs, his version history, his signature on the documents that helped push me out. I wasn't here by accident. This wasn't fate. This was the part where he started realizing he might have underestimated me. "You should drop by the office," he said, trying to sound casual. "We're always looking to upgrade our tech." I nodded politely. "Maybe, but I don't really sell to firms that redact evidence." His face changed, just for a second, then back to the mask. "Good seeing you again," he said, walking away with a little too much speed. I turned back to the screen where Clara pulsed gently in soft white light. "She remembers him," Kaylee whispered behind me, reading the logs. "So do I said. But the difference? Clara had receipts. It was sometime after midnight. The city below flickered like static, restless and bright. But my office was dead silent, except for the gentle hum of Clara spinning through data. A clause had just pinged, a familiar one, buried inside a vendor contract from 3 years ago. Standard language, nothing flashy. But Clara paused on it, flagged it. I leaned in. It wasn't what the clause said, it was what it replaced. Cross-referenced against archived metadata, the original language had included a safeguard, one that mysteriously disappeared 2 hours before the contract was finalized. One person edited it. Ethan. Clara didn't guess. She traced IP logs, timestamps, internal comms from the backup server of a third-party contractor. She wasn't just finding errors anymore. She was connecting motive. My screen split in two. Left side, the version they presented to the board. The version that painted me as careless, incompetent. Right side, the real one, quietly altered, logged, buried. I didn't breathe for a full minute. Then I hit export. It wasn't just one document. Clara had found 7 across 5 clients, redacted risk markers, missing disclosures, signatures added post-submission. It wasn't just carelessness, it was orchestration. And there it was, my erasure, digitized and traceable. I sat back in my chair, eyes closed. This wasn't the victory I thought it would be. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like silence breaking open, a kind of stillness that comes after years of gaslighting. When you finally realize you weren't crazy, you were just outnumbered. I called my legal advisor, Elena, woke her up. "I need you to review a package," I said. "It's going to change everything." There was a long pause. "How bad is it?" "It's not bad," I replied, staring at Clara's glowing interface. "It's precise. By morning, the files would be encrypted, triple verified, and ready, but I wasn't going to blast it all at once. Number this needed to land like thunder, not just proof of wrongdoing, but a story they couldn't bury this time. One clause had ended my career. Now, another was about to end theirs. The first strike didn't come from them. It came from a private equity firm in Zurich. A sudden cease in contract negotiations. No explanation. Just a vague note about unexpected reputational concerns. That was the signal. Within 72 hours, 2 more clients paused deals. Emails slowed. Phone calls turned clipped, then vanished entirely. I knew what was happening. They couldn't attack me directly. Clara was too clean, too surgical. But they could isolate me, starve the oxygen, freeze the growth. And they weren't doing it alone. The law firm had friends, ex-clients, quiet favors. A whisper here, a subtle warning there. She's too aggressive. She automates too much. Do you really want your contracts read by a machine that doesn't understand nuance? Funny how people only talk about nuance when they're trying to hide something. We weren't under legal attack. We were under something worse. Doubt. The kind that spreads faster than truth. Kaylee saw it too. She barged into my office with printouts and a storm in her eyes. They're coordinating, she snapped, dropping NDAS and Slack leaks onto my desk. That hedge fund in Boston, their general counsel is married to one of the Maddox partners. And this agency, they were told, off the record, to avoid Clara until she's been properly audited. I leaned back, fingers steepled under my chin. It wasn't war in the traditional sense. It was a proxy war. No uniforms, no declarations, just silence and shadows and chess moves made 5 steps ahead. But they made one mistake. They assumed I'd panic. They thought I'd fold. Instead, I pivoted. If they wanted to play quiet, so would I. I activated Clara's stealth protocol, an overlay that let her audit systems without alerting primary servers. No pings, no traces. We rerouted through shell vendors, old clients from the early days, tiny names they wouldn't notice. Within a week, Clara had infiltrated a 6 legal ecosystems, reading emails, scanning revisions, mapping influence. And what she found? A pattern. Someone was erasing risk markers after contracts were finalized. Not just mine, dozens, over a 5-year span. The red flags weren't mistakes, they were signatures. Tiny digital fingerprints that all pointed back to one place, Maddox and Gray. They hadn't just tried to bury me, they'd been burying others too. And now, I had the map. The envelope wasn't flashy, no gold trim, no wax seal, just thick stock paper with my name typed in clean serif font. Inside, an invitation. Dinner at the Maddox Partners' residence. Not a meeting, not a call, dinner. Handwritten at the bottom, let's talk, privately. E. It wasn't really a request, more like a test. See, power doesn't always flex with subpoenas or press releases. Sometimes, it invites you to dinner and waits to see if you'll come hungry. I sat with the invitation for 2 days. Read it, reread it, left it on the windowsill like a trap I didn't want to admit was bait. Then I said yes, not because I was curious, but because I was ready. The night arrived with cold wind and too much silence. I didn't bring backup, I didn't wear armor, just a simple black dress and Clara humming quietly on my phone. The house was just as I remembered. Oversized, overdecorated, designed to look old money, but reeking of nouveau wealth. A dozen vintage wines, and not one honest conversation ever poured. They greeted me like nothing had ever happened. Ethan was first. He smiled, tight, deliberate. Glad you came. I said nothing. The dining room was set like a magazine spread. Long table, crystal glasses. People I used to call mentors now laughing, like this was a reunion, not a reckoning. Toasts were made, stories exchanged. Someone even brought up my law school article. Decentralized Risk and Corporate Blind Spots. They'd all read it. Suddenly, they were fans. That's when I knew. They weren't trying to fight me anymore. They were trying to fold me back in. Why work so hard outside the system? One of them asked, swirling wine. When you could be leading it from within? And there it was. The real invitation, not to dinner, but to betrayal. Mine. Because what they were offering wasn't redemption. It was silence. Power in exchange for forgetting. A partner track, a board seat, a headline deal that would turn Clara into their asset. I let them speak, nodded, smiled at all the right moments. But underneath the table, Clara was listening, recording, parsing every promise, every carefully worded bribe. Because this wasn't dinner, it was evidence. And when the wine had run out and the masks had slipped just enough, I stood up, thanked them, and walked away without dessert. Because the next course would be theirs, served cold and televised. The truth doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it lands like a whisper. Other times it hits like a data bomb. At 9 a.m., sharp, Clara initiated the cascade. 2,000 inboxes, 12 jurisdictions, 7 regulators, 1 link, a single portal labeled Compliance Mirror, password protected, time-locked, time-stamped, and legally verified. Inside, everything. Metadata trails, edited clauses, email threads, shell transfers, client names, partner signatures, internal Slack chats with lines like, just scrub it before sign-off. No headlines, no press release, not yet. We let the system find them first. The SEC's crawler hit the file 38 seconds after launch. The DOJ was watching by noon. By the time lunch rolled around, half the firm's partner chat was on silent mode. I didn't say a word, didn't need to. Kaylee watched the heat map from our office in Brooklyn, little red dots blinking across financial centers. Tokyo, Frankfurt, Toronto, D.C. What now? She asked, eyes wide. I took a sip of coffee and nodded to the screen. Now we wait. It took less than 4 hours. The first domino fell quietly. An anonymous tweet from a junior compliance officer at a global bank. Just got a flag from a system I've never seen before. And if this is real, we're all complicit. That's when the panic began. Firms that had never heard of Clara were suddenly digging through old deals, searching for the watermark. Boards were demanding audits. Phone lines at Maddox and Gray were jammed. And the press? They didn't find the story. The story found them. Leaked screenshots, redacted clauses, anonymous quotes from employees terrified but tired of staying silent. Within 24 hours, the Wall Street Journal ran a headline that said everything. The machine that caught the lawyers. I didn't speak on record, didn't post, didn't tweet. But Clara was everywhere, and for the first time, no one could deny it. What they thought was a startup was infrastructure. What they thought was vengeance was proof, and what they tried to bury was blooming, in full view. Truth has a strange echo. You send it out clean, but it never comes back untouched. By the third day, the story was everywhere. Front page, prime time, Reddit, Slack groups full of junior analysts, suddenly realizing they'd signed off on ghosts. But not all fallout is corporate. Some of it is personal. The texts started with silence, then denial, then the pleading. You didn't have to do it this way. Think about who you're hurting. We were friends once. It wasn't just the firm under fire. It was the families tied to it. The assistants, the interns, the young lawyers who had no idea they'd been carrying live rounds in their briefcases. One paralegal emailed anonymously. I always thought it was weird how they edited filings after midnight. I never asked questions. I didn't want to know. Now I can't sleep. Somebody's retirement vanished in an hour when the firm's valuation tanked. A partner's divorce papers leaked. Not mine. Theirs. Even Ethan. He went quiet. Radio silent. But not before one final email found its way into my inbox. No subject. No greeting. Just a line. You win. But it won't fix what they broke. I read it once, then deleted it. Because this was never about winning. This was about remembering what losing felt like. Every time I walked into a room and was talked over. Every time I flagged a risk and was told it was just semantics. Every time they made me feel smaller than the truth I carried. And now, the truth had weight, too heavy for them to hold. But let's not pretend it didn't cost something. Kaylee lost a client she liked, one who didn't do anything wrong but didn't want the heat. My inbox was half fan mail, half death threats. Investors called, worried about our tone. Maybe you should soften the messaging, one suggested. Play the reformer, not the rebel. I hung up, because the thing no one tells you about justice, it doesn't come with applause. It comes with silence, with space, with doors that close before new ones open. But if you're lucky, really lucky, it also comes with clarity, a quiet sense of knowing that what you did mattered, even if no one thanks you for it, even if it cost you more than you expected, and especially if it means no one else has to be erased the way you were. It came by courier. No branding, no return address, just a matte black envelope and a weight to it that felt intentional. Inside, a letter, a contract, and a name I hadn't seen in ink for years. Maddox and Gray. The letter was short. In light of recent events, the partners have voted to extend a proposal. A formal seat at the table. Equity. Control. A complete rewrite of my legacy. Not as the whistleblower, but as the woman who returned to lead the house she once burned. It wasn't desperation. It was strategy. They couldn't kill Clara, so they'd try to contain her, bring the story back inside the circle. Quiet the storm with a promotion. Turn me into a symbol, not of rebellion, but reconciliation. They even offered to rename a division after me, as if my silence could be bought with a hallway and a plaque. I held the letter for a long time, let the weight of it settle in my chest, because a part of me, the tired part, the human part, wanted to say yes, not for the money, not for the power, for the illusion that maybe returning could feel like closure. But then I remembered the nights I walked home, wondering if I'd imagined it all. The humiliation of being dismissed in conference rooms while they stole credit line by line. The way they said, "That's just how it works," when I pointed at a flaw. And I realized this wasn't an offer. It was a dare. To forget. To fold. To accept that justice had an expiration date. So I picked up the pen and wrote one word across the contract in red ink. Declined. Not out of vengeance. Not out of pride. Out of principle. Because if Clara had taught me anything, it was this. Systems don't change because you forgive them. They change because you outgrow them. And then you build something they can't control. The headlines didn't last. They never do. A week after the data drop, the story was already slipping off front pages, replaced by the next scandal, the next crash. The next algorithm gone wrong. But the echoes, those stayed. Law schools started hosting panels about Clara, about digital truth, about how contracts were never just words, but weapons, and how, sometimes, the most dangerous clause is the one you're told to ignore. I got emails, hundreds, some from law students, some from burned out associates, some from single moms building apps from their kitchen tables. They didn't want advice. They wanted to say thank you. One of them wrote, "I didn't know someone like me could win until you did." That one stayed with me, not because it flattered, but because it haunted. Because behind every "you give me hope," there was an unspoken confession. I've been surviving in a system that doesn't see me. I remembered what that felt like. Still do. See, nobody tells you that justice doesn't fix the wound. It just stops the bleeding. The scar stays, and you learn to live with it. Clara was still growing. We weren't chasing unicorn status or billion-dollar press. We were building slow, intentionally, carefully. We turned down 3 acquisition offers, 2 of them from firms that had once called me a liability. Poetic. One morning, I walked into the office early, just after sunrise. The team wasn't in yet. The space was quiet. Still, Clara's interface pulsed on the central screen, waiting. I stared at it for a long time. Not as a founder, not as a lawyer, just as a woman who'd carried a truth too long without being believed. And now the world couldn't unsee it. That mattered. Even if most people would forget my name, even if history wrote it differently. The ones who needed to remember would. The echoes would stay. 2 weeks after everything settled, I found myself back where it started. Not in a courtroom, not in a conference room, but in the city library, the legal archives wing, 3rd floor, same spot I used to study in law school. Tucked between the dusty rows, no one cared to browse anymore. I wasn't looking for anything, just remembering who I was before the betrayal, before Clara, before I knew how deep the rot ran. I pulled an old casebook from the shelf, torts and remedies. The margins were filled with my scribbles, tiny arrows, circled terms, one phrase underlined twice. Every precedent starts as resistance. That's what this had been. Not revenge, not rebellion, just resistance. Refusal to let silence be the final word. My phone buzzed. A new email. A young woman from Chicago. First-year associate. Fired for flagging an ethics violation her firm didn't want to see. Her subject line? "I built something. Can I show you?" I smiled. Because that's what came next. Not court battles, not boardroom wins. Legacy. A chain reaction of truth seekers refusing to be erased. Not loud, not flashy, but steady, unstoppable. People like her, and maybe people like you, writing the next line. Because if this story proves anything, it's this. You don't need permission to build something that matters. You don't need a title to stand for what's right. And if they try to shut you out, good. That just means you're building something they can't control. So write your line, whisper it, code it, scream it if you have to. Just make sure it's yours. Because someday, someone will read your story and realize they weren't alone. And maybe that's the point. Not to win, not to dominate, but to light the path just far enough for the next one to follow. If this story hit something in you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told to stay in your lane, let this be your reminder. You don't owe the system your silence. You don't owe your doubters an explanation. And you definitely don't owe your power to people who tried to convince you it didn't exist. You just owe yourself one thing: to keep building, even if it's quiet, even if no one claps yet, because the day will come when they finally look up and realize you were never behind, you were just ahead. And if you're still listening right now, then maybe, just maybe, you're one of us. So go build, go speak, go change something. And if you need to hear this again later, you know where to find me. Now hit like if this spoke to you. Drop a comment if you've ever been told your dream was unrealistic. And subscribe, because this is only the beginning. I'll see you in the next story.